Okay, so we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to AWS What's Next. My name is Boaz, and today I'm excited to host James Gosling, a distinguished engineer in AWS. Hi, James. How are you today?
Well, I'm doing good. We could do with a little bit of rain, but otherwise, blue skies and happiness.
Oh, that's great. And we are here because we would like to talk about one of our latest IoT announcements, the new AWS IoT Greengrass 2.0. So before we dive deep into the new announcement, for those that are not familiar with Greengrass, James, what is Greengrass?
So Greengrass it's really two things. One is a set of software that runs on a device that manages the device's relationship to the cloud. And it's a collection of components that can do things like managing secrets, managing secure tokens, um, streaming data out to the cloud. And the particular form of that that's interesting is streaming data to the cloud when the network links are unreliable, managing queuing and all of that sort of stuff. It manages the life cycles of the components on the device, and which includes things like installing and error recovery and all of that. Um, so that a lot of the sort of stuff that everybody has to do on a device, it does. And all the unique stuff about what you're trying to do with your device, it doesn't do. And then the other side of that is the cloud, which has itself is sort of broken down into things that, the Amazon term is the data plane, which is all the data that you send out or bring forward, and then the control plane, all of the sort of management tasks you have to do with devices, like upgrading their software or changing some tuning parameter. If you're running air conditioners, and you're running out of power, a power company can send out a command that says, go into power conservation mode. Um, and of course, the thing that makes that all tricky is being able to do that over large fleets of devices.
Yeah, that's always a big challenge. So which type of devices are we talking about? You gave few examples, but can you share a bit more about what customers are doing with it?
So it's all over the map. So, at Amazon, we've got these two sort of embedded software stacks. There's FreeRTOS and there's Greengrass. And the way to think about the difference between them is that Greengrass is for everything big enough to run Linux, and FreeRTOS is about the rest of them.
As small as possible.
Yeah. Um,
Okay.
and 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 so we have this big challenge of, what is an embedded device, and they're all over the place, right? So, um, we routinely test on things like Raspberry Pis. Actually, a Raspberry Pi is a large and luxurious machine for us.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm using it a lot.
yeah, so a Pi 3 is large and um, luxurious. A Pi 4 is ballroom dancing. Um, there are people I know that run them on sort of Pi Zero scale devices. Um, and so things down at that end, but also people are using this on sort of larger industrial control machines. So this could be, if you go to a company like OnLogic, who make these um, industrial controllers, um, for $700 or $800, you can get something with a few gigs of RAM and a real processor. And not too long ago, those things would have been major supercomputers, but now they're just something that you bolt to the wall to control
And,
some
and
machine.
expensive in some cases, but anywhere that basically can run Linux can run Greengrass, right?
If you can run Linux, you can run Greengrass, and it's not just Linux. We've um, on some of the things that are kind of close to Linux. We've done some work. So yeah, it's pretty broad.
Okay. So as I said before, earlier this week, we have launched Greengrass 2.0. What's new in this version?
So it was really a complete top to bottom rethink of how the structure works. And the best way to think of it is that it's really deeply all about modularity. So Greengrass has been sort of broken down into a group of tiny components. In the middle, there's this thing called the nucleus. The nucleus does essentially nothing other than manage life cycles. Um, and then everything is layered on top of that as other components. And there are sort of two reasons for that. One is it gives you the flexibility to swap out different kinds of components. So like in Greengrass v1, there was an MQTT broker. In Greengrass v2, we don't have an MQTT broker. And yet, it's easy to install an MQTT broker. So you can kind of pick, well, I want this MQTT broker or that MQTT broker. So if you want one of the small type compact ones like Moquette, or one of the high volume ones like Mosquito, or you want something that's like an all singing, all dancing Swiss Army knife kind of message broker, you can use something like RabbitMQ. It's all about choice, right? It's about giving you choice to have different installations of whatever, right? So
Based on my
particularly
implementation, based on my exact needs, right?
right. So if you're doing something that requires MQTT, but it's like a home automation thing, then you can use a small MQTT broker. If you're doing some major industrial thing where you have a large high volume fleet of devices, then use Mosquito. Use and if you want, you can use one of the fault tolerant versions of it. A lot of these things have the free version and the for money version, and we make it easy for you to just pick and choose.
Okay, so we're probably going to talk about some additional new features in the new version, but how do you get started with Greengrass 2.0? Is it
Um,
easy to begin using?
so it is really easy to use it. So why don't we do a little demo?
Okay, I always
Um,
like demos, especially live ones.
always like demos. Okay, so the blank looking region on the left hand side is a terminal window, and up there at the upper left hand side it says SSH, a bunch of gobbledygook because I'm doing some port mapping, and then to my NVIDIA Jetson Nano. So I'll log in there, and you can see it's running on a Tegra, 64-bit Tegra, which is the Jetson Nano. And then over here on the other side, this is the getting started page for Greengrass. And so I'm going to set up one core device. I'm going to give it a name, George. It's a Jetson, so it has to be named George. Although that joke has been getting really tired. I'm not going to put it in a group because you don't have to. Then there's a bunch of preconditions. You have to have set up the device a little bit. So long as you can SSH to the device and do sudo and have sudo not ask you for a password, then everything is easy. So I'm going to copy the download command.
So just to compare it to the first version, if people are not familiar with how it used to be installing Greengrass on your device, how different it is from installing version 2?
Well, so version 1 got quite a bit better. Up until recently, version 1 was taking a long time. I know the first time I tried installing version 1, um, I spent like 4 or 5 hours before I just gave up in a screaming fit because you had to set up all kinds of security and authentication stuff.
Yep.
And that's all been automated now. So I'm going to bring the second line over, and I'm going to get rid of some of the little helpful bits just to make it a little more of a challenge. And I like installing it in /opt.
So the first command is basically downloading the packages. The second one is executing some scripts that will do the local installation and
Yeah,
set
yeah,
up the
and these
environment.
are right, and these are uglier than they should be. We'll get there. So now you can see it's getting certificates, creating an IoT thing, and setting up token exchange policies and identity and access management policies, and configuring all kinds of stuff, getting your root CA set up, and that's all done.
And you don't
Okay,
need to do it
so
manually because you had to do it manually with Greengrass 1, like download all the certificates, including the root certificate, place it in a certain
right,
place, and tie it
right,
all
and
together.
that's just like all done. So um, if you look in my IoT things, there's this thing called George, and so the IoT core has this notion of a thing, that's things that it tracks, but Greengrass is kind of a layer on top of that. So it has these core devices, which are things with a lot more texture. So you can see here on the bottom that there's George, and if I look at it, um, it's got some things, but I want to do a deployment. So I go down to deploy. And so normally when you install things, what you get is just the basic nucleus. So I'm going to create a new I'm going to call that. I'm going to send it to a device. George.
So while you're setting it up, for our viewers on Twitch, if you have any questions you would like to ask us, feel free to type in the chat. We will try to take some of the questions later on.
Yeah.
So if you're on
So I'm
Twitch,
gonna.
send us
So
questions. Yeah, go on.
yeah. So when you're doing a deployment, you can deploy software that's either public components, and there are a number of them. And the set of public components is going to get larger over time. So one of them is a command line tool that you can use on the device if you're SSH'd into it. And another one is the debug view or debug console. Got that added. So so I'm going to deploy these guys, and I'm going to hit next. There they are, next. And it's
same way. If I wanted to add MQTT, I would do it the same way, right? It's just adding another component.
Yeah. So if you're using a pre-canned component, and right now the list is relatively limited, but it's going to be growing pretty quickly. And also, people can contribute components, and you can make your own components. Making components is really easy, and in a minute or two, I'll make some. So I just deployed this. If I go back and look at George, it's got those like redeployed now. Now one of the tricky things is that, so you see this guy, the local debug console. What it does is it actually injects a small HTTP server into the device. And so I'm going to go and go to localhost 1441 and there's this security thing we go through. Um, one of the things about Greengrass is that there's a huge amount of paranoia about security, and that's a whole talk on its own. So I'm just going to do a quick slash op slash ggv2 bin Greengrass CLI get debug. So this whole debug password thing is all about proving to the web browser that you are able to SSH into the device.
Okay.
So I'm going to, and it's generated a password full of crypto gook, and it generates new passwords on a pretty regular basis. So stealing a password isn't terribly hard. So now you see this graph. So when you build a component, it can have dependencies on other components. So if we take a look at, say, the debug console, so just to reconfirm here. So this web page is being displayed on a web browser that's running on my desktop machine, but the web page is coming from the device, and it's giving me an overview of what's going on the device, right? So if I take a look at device details, it's running Linux, it's a Tegra AArch64, yada, yada. So we go back to the console here where we see this. Let's take a look at the local debug console. And it's a plugin component. So plugin components are slightly magical in that they get injected directly into the nucleus itself. They're not just running on the device, they get run in the address space of the nucleus. And it's got a number of configuration parameters that you can change, and it's got a couple of dependencies, one on the command line. So that you see there's these two arcs that come out of the console, one that goes to the command line, the other one that goes to the nucleus. Those are these dependencies. Those dashed lines are soft dependencies. The soft dependency is one that if the CLI component gets reinstalled, I don't have to restart the console. It's something that where the depender can adapt to changes in its dependence or dependencies. And it just sort of tells the nucleus to sort of like back off, because normally what would happen is if the command line gets reinstalled, you install a new version of it, then this guy would be restarted. But because this guy's able to handle that, you don't have to do that. And so there's the CLI, which is also a plugin. But now let's do the interesting stuff. Let's build a component. So let's say
Oh, we're going to Lua.
well, the thing I like about using Lua for demos is that it's well known enough that everybody knows it, but weird enough that people are kind of surprised by it. And in particular, the fact that Lua isn't installed on most things by default. So now if I say that there's a little command line tool that it's not quite in the open source repositories yet, but it's getting there. Greengrass quick templates hello.lua. So that is actually building the recipes, building all of the components, and it's deploying it, from the command line, right? So this over here is the command line on the device. And you see
Here it
that
is.
now you see on the dependency graph that updated while we were watching. And now they both finished. So that hello world is when it just prints hello world, and that's it. It's done, right? So if we now look at hello, this is the recipe that was constructed. It's got a hard dependency on the Lua runtime. And the only thing in this recipe is it's got a run phase in its life cycle, and it just does its thing. The one that it depends on, Lua, it's got a bunch of stuff to manage the installation of Lua. And so it's like if you've got apt-get, then it tries to use apt-get. Otherwise, it tries to use yum, and it does all the obvious things. So
That reminds me a
let's
bit a Docker file. Maybe it's a good time to talk about container
so
support in
so
Greengrass 2.0.
yeah, so these components can be kind of anything.
Okay.
So the ones that I just showed you are like naked processes. They just run on the device. For lots of situations, that's the thing that you want. But there are all kinds of other encapsulation mechanisms um, for applications that you're going to run on devices, right? So some people want to run Docker, and we let you run Docker. It's all set up so that you can do that. It's not right now. It's not as easy as we would like it to be, but it's still pretty easy. You can use snaps. You can use virtual machines if you want, right? You can use KVM, right? And so I showed you this recipe for Lua. You can write a similar recipe for Docker. Um, no, I won't bother with that. I was going to show you the Docker recipe, but that would be silly. We've
Yeah.
only got half an hour.
Yeah, we have something like 7 minutes left, and there's actually the question from the audience. Amtic005 asks us, do we need to install Java before we execute? I assume the answer for this is yes.
Yeah, it's yes right now. It it will automatically install it a little bit later, but it will run on pretty much any version of Java. Anything from JDK 8 up. I typically run on either 11 or 15. And the one of the questions always comes up is what's the memory footprint? And that's a little hard to quantify because it depends on a certain amount of tuning. If you just run it out of the box, it uses the out of the box JVM tuning, which assumes that you're going to be running on some like giant machine, so it starts out just grabbing a whole lot of memory. But you can actually set the maximum heap size pretty small. If you I typically set it to like 20 or 30 megs, and that's just fine. And if the footprint of the VM itself is a little much, you can use JLink. JLink is a really nice tool that came out in JDK 9 that lets you slice and dice the VM.
And
And
Amit just said that was going to be his next question about the footprint.
yeah,
So
yeah,
great minds.
and if you're really paranoid, you can start using some of the static compilers like Graal. Although the problem with the static compilers is you end up losing a fair amount of the dynamic behavior. So things like plugins become more awkward. Or if you're like using in embedded situations, there's a company called ICUS that has a VM. It's called Jamaica VM, and they're essentially a static compiler. We've got some folks who have tried using this on Jamaica VM, and it's been fine. And that makes it, really quite tiny. But most of the time, certainly on like a Pi 3 level machine, the out of the box JDKs are just fine. They don't even use all that much resources. The sort of hotel load for CPU consumption it doesn't break 1%, of a single core. And on a 4-core machine, it's just vanishingly lightweight.
Definitely. So I see a lot of advantages. I've been using Greengrass, the previous version, quite a lot, and I see a lot of advantages moving to version 2. And I wonder what is the transition path for customers that just see this demo and would like to check their option to move from V1 to V2, what they should do, backward compatibility, is it supported? How is it going?
Yeah, so there were, some things that we kind of had to break. But if you had built a V1 app that just ran just ran as a Linux process and wasn't running in a container, then that's going to be pretty easy. The ones that run as Lambdas, we actually have V1 Lambda support and a bunch of the V1 API support. I can't quote you, Bible and verse or chapter and verse of the Bible on just which pieces work. But we're trying to make it better. But one of the pieces of feedback that we've heard pretty regularly lately is, wow, this lets me get rid of a whole bunch of workarounds. And that was sort of a goal, right? We've spent the last 4 years hearing issues from customers, and so we decided to fix them all, and a bunch of them ended up requiring that we commit a little bit of breakage, and the theme that sort of went through all of these things was making the whole system much more modular and much more flexible and much more scalable. So it's been it's not as smooth a ride as it should be, and we will be smoothing things out some more, but generally it's pretty easy.
Yeah, I think this is a good call out to end this session, saying that in general it's pretty easy to start with, even easier than the Greengrass 1. That was pretty easy. Maybe a longer installation, maybe a bit less customized, but still very easy to start with. So we are almost at the end of our session. So thanks a lot, James. And I think our call out for today is going to be go build. It's very easy to start with, especially with the new version.
It's easy to start with. It's easy to develop from a command line. There's actually some IDE tools in the works. So we're really focused on making ease of development a real win here.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about Greengrass 2.0, check out IoT 202. This is a session that James did earlier, and it's going to be available on demand soon on the platform of reInvent. Following this session, we will have another AWS What Next session, this time Amazon Managed Services for Grafana. Once again, James, thanks a lot for joining me today. It was a real honor. And thanks all of you for spending the last 30 minutes with us. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.